Good evening, Board. Before we start, our chairman and vice chair are both absent from tonight's meeting. Staff's requesting a volunteer to chair the meeting, and then we'll just approve that on a voice vote.
I volunteer to chair the meeting.
Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I'd like to call to order the April 10th meeting of the James City County Wetlands Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their despoliation. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
And Mr. Dunn is here for Mr. Apperson. Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
And Mr. Lukens is here for Mr. Hughes. Mr. Waltrip is absent.
Our first order of business are the minutes from the March 13th meeting. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions to the minutes?
No.
Minutes stand approved. Our next order of business are public hearings. We have one public hearing tonight, WJPA 19-0011, the Governor's Land Marina Bulkhead. Mr. Long, will you please make this staff presentation?
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Stormwater Watershed Planner, here to present WJPA-19-001, 1636 Harbor Road, the Governor's Land Foundation and Governor's Land Marina. Ms. Lisa Smith of Governor's Land Foundation has applied for a wetlands permit to install an emergency bulkhead repair on property located at 1636 Harbor Road within the James River and James River watershed. The original bulkhead was constructed in 1994 and remained functional until 2017 when staff was approached due to a blowout in the bulkhead near the fuel pumps. This bulkhead failure was repaired immediately, and in 2018, staff was again approached about another bulkhead blowout located behind a citizen's property, which was further repaired. Governor's Land Foundation is now proposing to replace the entirety of the marina bulkhead. Even though there are no wetland impacts within the board's jurisdiction, the commercial nature of the application is not a permitted use. Therefore, an application for a permit must be submitted through the Virginia Marine Resource Commission and processed by the local Wetlands Board. It is for this reason case number WJPA-19-0011 appears before the board this evening. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieving a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following three criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature. The proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelmingly public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of the wetlands. Should it satisfy all three criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as follows: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment of an in lieu fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of the permit. Staff has reviewed this application against the mitigation policy and finds that this project meets the three criteria outlined in the policy and that there will not be a loss of any vegetated tidal wetlands under this project. Staff recommends approval of this application, and should the board wish to approve, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and federal permits required for the project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to commencement of such activities. The wetlands permit for this project shall expire on April 10th, 2020 if construction has not begun, and an extension of the permit requested no later than 6 weeks, February 27th, 2020, of the expiration date. And I have a brief presentation. And the project will be located at 1636 Harbor Road, otherwise known as the Governor's Land Marina. The vicinity map showing the approximate location on an aerial photo. This is the existing marina as it is currently, with topography surrounding the marina. The floodplain here encompasses the entirety of the project and the proposed location. The existing site plan is as shown, with boat slips here in the middle and a bulkhead surrounding houses that lie adjacent to the property. Here in orange, we show the previously repaired emergency and fuel dock. The yellow lining will show the proposed bulkhead repair in the exact same location as the original bulkhead. I believe there is noted that there may be a little bit of riprap here in the red lining, which will be removed as necessary. Site photos from the project site. Here's the vinyl bulkhead of which they plan to remove and replace. Facing out towards the adjacent side of the marina with houses on the outside of the bulkhead. Here is the previously repaired emergency fix from years past. Again, staff does recommend approval for this project and proposal, given the conditions that all other necessary federal, state, and local permits are acquired as they are required. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations. And then a wetlands permit for this project shall expire on April 10th, 2020 if construction has not begun, with extensions requested no later than 6 weeks prior to the expiration date, dated February 27th, 2020. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any questions for staff?
Trevor, just for clarification, the application speaks to some areas replacing in place, I believe, but also at a maximum distance of 2 feet in front of the existing bulkhead. Is it in place, or is it a combination of those two options?
I believe it is in place, but I'll allow the applicant to correct if that's wrong.
Any other questions for staff? At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Good evening. My name's Lisa Smith. I'm the general manager for Governor's Land Foundation, and I basically came tonight just to answer any questions that you may have. And I brought a team with me that's has more experience in engineering than Lisa Smith. That's not my cup of tea. So anyway,
I was just curious if they're immediately in front of, or if they're at the 2 foot limit for the replacement of the sheet pile.
Hey, Tom, you can probably answer that. Tom is, Tom Numbers, he's assisted us with this permitting process. He is an engineer and has been very helpful, so I will turn it over to you, Mr. Numbers.
Tom Numbers, I am a licensed professional engineer in the state of Virginia, and yes, have been pivotal as well as the others present here in this project. Direct answer to your question, the objective of construction is to be within 2 feet of the existing wall. So basically, existing wall, which has failed, roughly 75% of the wall has failed due to horizontal rips. We're going to put a new wall, 2 foot maximum, in front of the existing wall. So it's just placement of a new wall in front of the existing wall, as close as we possibly can, while continuing the alignment and structural integrity.
Fairly straightforward. I just was curious. Thank you.
I was just a little bit curious. What caused the failure? I mean, it's not that old.
It's 25 years old. It's an aluminum wall. There has been, as noted, a horizontal rip approximately 2 feet above what's called the mud line, i.e. the floor of the marina. That's viewed as possibly electrolysis. So when you have basically a wall that has a rip in it, the soil behind it is coming through there. The structural integrity of the wall has failed. So when what has transpired at both of the failures discussed, where the soil has slipped down behind the wall, of course, went to the land side, and the water side kicked out. So those are the 2 failures that we experienced, and both of those have been attributed to pressures. I won't get too technical, but and an electrolysis. It has not been rust.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for the applicant?
Just curious, will you backfill to the new bulkhead, or?
Yes, the existing bulkhead will be basically cut at ground level. The new bulkhead will be within the 2 feet, have its own cap on it, and will overfill basically with some landscaping soils to refresh the area on the land side, the property owner's side.
Any other questions? Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion among the board?
Mr. Chairman, fairly routine practice. I have no issue with this.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to adopt the staff resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board case WJPA 19-0011, VMRC 19-0033 at 1636 Harbor Road.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries and the permit is granted. Thank you for coming out. We have new matters for board consideration. We have new matters of special privilege. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, we are adjourned. And now we are going to reconvene as the Chesapeake Bay Board. I'd like to call to order the April 10th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
Mr. Dunn is here for Mr. Apperson. Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
And Mr. Lukens is here for Mr. Hughes. Mr. Waltrip is not present.
Our first order of business are the minutes from our March 13th meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, changes to the minutes?
No.
Okay, the minutes stand approved. Our next order of business are public hearings, and our first public hearing is CBPA 19-0026 for 3017 Spotswood Key.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson, Senior Watershed Planner, here to present case CBE 19-0026, 3017 Spotswood K. Mr. Carl Story of Williamsburg Landing Incorporated has applied for Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for construction of a deck on property located at 3017 Spotswood K within the Williamsburg Landing and the College Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel Number 48201000002. Parcel was platted prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act in 1990. Total lot size for the property is 72.7 acres, of which 62% is located within the RPA. The proposed house plan includes the conversion of an existing deck into a sunroom and adding a new deck. In keeping consistent with the rest of the units in the area, Williamsburg Landing has slowly been converting other units within this, with this proposed update, with 3017 Spotswood K being one of the last to be converted. It is for this reason that the applicant has proposed the construction of the deck equating to 270 square feet of impervious cover within the landward 50-foot RPA. At this time, the applicant has not proposed a mitigation plan. However, staff does require one planting unit for this amount of encroachment. Staff's evaluated the application and the exception request for the construction of the deck and finds that it does meet the conditions laid out in sections 2311 and 2314, and that the application should be heard before the board because the deck is more than necessary to afford relief. Therefore, the request must be considered by this board at a public hearing. Staff's reviewed the application and exception request and has determined that the impacts associated with this proposal to be minor for the proposed development and does recommend approval of this exception request with the following conditions incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. That a mitigation plan consisting of 1 canopy tree and 3 shrubs be provided along with a surety of $250 in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office to ensure that the mitigation plantings are completed. That the exception request approval become null and void if construction is not begun by April 20th, 2020, and that any written request for extension to the exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater Resource Protection Division staff no later than February 27th, 2020, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. And if I could turn your attention to the monitor, a brief presentation. Again, this is case number CBPA 19-0026 at 3017 Spotswood K. And their request is for the construction of a deck. The Williamsburg Landing property adjacent to 199, which was, or the total property is 72.7 acres. Unit in question is the left-hand side of this duplex. Topography of the site, you can see this was laid out. The road went down the ridge line of the property on this peninsula with the units surrounding it there. And then if we superimpose the RPA on there, you can see the RPA does impact, or these units impact the RPA. Floodplain as it affects this property down at the toe of the slope has no effect on this application. From the application, this outline is the unit in question, with this outline being the proposed deck extension. Green is the 100-foot RPA, the renovation to the existing unit, and then the proposed deck. A couple site photographs. Looking at the back, this deck will be removed and this area filled in with a new sunroom. No additional impervious cover with that renovation. The Area that would be impacted is mossy. There's no grass to be maintained or whatnot. So again, staff does recommend approval. We believe these impacts to be minor, and should the board choose to approve, recommend these conditions, that any other necessary local, federal, and state permits be required, that a mitigation plan and a surety of $250 be required. That does say 500, but it would be 250. The exception request be null and void should construction not begin in 1 year from tonight's date, April 20th or April 10th, 2020, and any written request for extension be submitted to our office no later than 6 weeks prior to that expiration date, which is February 27, 2020. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Okay, no questions. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. If the applicant is present, would you like to come forward and address the board?
This is the first time, this is the first time I've done this, so I'm not
Okay.
sure if I really needed to go, but I just want to come here representing Williamsburg Landing. My Director of Construction, Randy Rattan, is here with me. And it's just a simple matter of trying to improve our property.
Okay, just state your name for the
Oh,
record.
I'm sorry, my name is Carl Story. I'm Renovations Manager at Williamsburg Landing.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
The picture that we saw, I mean, the site plan is rather basic. The deck that we saw in the picture is getting a roof over it
Yes, correct.
and and enclosed in screen.
The area that you see as a deck right now will become a conditioned space, so it will be conditioned. It was not
Okay.
a screen porch, no.
How is stormwater currently directed off-site?
This sits on the edge of a hill, this, and it
Steep
goes
flows?
down. Yeah, very steep, yes.
And is there expansion beyond the deck? Or is it
No
only the
expansion.
deck?
Only the deck, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I don't perceive this as a huge issue. I mean, there's an existing deck in that space already. They're already treating the water to a degree.
Someone like to make a motion?
I move to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for the Chesapeake Bay Board case CBA-19-0026 at 3017 Spotswood Keep.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception. Ms. Parman, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn,
Yes.
Mr. Gussman,
Yes.
Mr. Lukens.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries and the exception is granted. Thank you for coming out this evening.
Randy, I didn't recognize you, man. Good to see you.
Okay, our next case, CBPA 19-0028 for 117 Godspeed Lane.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 19-0028. Mr. Mo Bloxam, Southern Landscaping and Construction Incorporated, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Jess Gentry for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall on property located at 117 Godspeed Lane within the Powhatan Creek watershed. Parcel was platted in 1975 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Total lot size for the property is 0.6 acres, of which 22% can be located within the RPA. The total impervious encroachment within the RPA is 480 square feet, located within the seaward 50-foot RPA. There are existing timbers in the location of the proposed retaining wall, and the applicant is proposing to replace those timbers with a stone retaining wall and fill the otherwise sloping yard to prevent any future erosion. A joint permit application for the reconstruction of a bulkhead and boat launch associated with this parcel was submitted. However, that work is outside local Wetlands Board jurisdiction. At this time, the applicant has proposed the plantings of 15 native shrubs and 240 square feet of mulch, therefore exceeding county mitigation requirements. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of the retaining wall and finds that the application meets the conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard by the board because the retaining wall is accessory in nature. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. A WQIA was submitted for the proposed project as well. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff does recommend approval of this exception request with the following conditions incorporated into this approval. The applicant obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3 floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to commencement of such activities. That a surety of $250 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office be made to ensure the mitigation plantings, and that this exception request approval become null and void if construction has not begun by April 10th, 2020, with written requests for an extension be submitted no later than 6 weeks, February 27th, 2020, prior to the expiration date. I'll divert your attention to your monitors for a brief presentation. Again, this is CBPA 19-0028, 117 Godspeed Lane, and the applicant request to construct a retaining wall. Vicinity map shows the parcel to be off of Neckland Road here on Godspeed Lane. An aerial photo showing the canal that's associated with and the proposed bulkhead in this region highlighted here. Topography is fairly flat, however it does steep off towards the water as you get closer seaward. And the resource protection area as it affects this parcel, as you can see, it comes off fairly, takes up most of this backyard of this property. The floodplain as it affects this property as well, affecting the majority of it, along with the rest of the houses on the street. And a site plan showing the RPA line impacting, or as associated with the lot here. And the proposed retaining wall to be implemented here, and the existing river rock that is here. This would be the more close-up version of the retaining wall that's proposed, with the shrubs that are proposed for mitigation landward of the retaining wall, and pervious pavers that are there to take the place of the crushed stone that is currently existing on site. Because crushed stone is considered impervious, that is not coupled in with the impacts to the RPA. Site photograph with the timber here and the crushed the river rock here. This photograph shows a slight sloping that will be filled with the retaining wall. Again, staff does recommend approval of this project and exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required. That all development activities located within the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations, and that a surety of $250 be required to ensure mitigation plantings. And that this exception request become null and void if construction has not begun by April 10th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than February 27th, 2020. Happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time. Thank you for your time.
Questions for staff?
Real quick, I'm sorry, I just didn't see it. Where were the timbers?
We're considering, the black curved line to be the timbers that are holding in place and separating the yard from the river rock. That's the defining area that will then be replaced by the retaining wall.
Okay, and then it says that they're going to fill the otherwise sloping yard to prevent further erosion. So they're going to put in a retaining wall and then fill from the house forward to that wall?
Yes, yeah. Basically, they'll, and I believe the contractor can speak more to it, but they'll fill from the height of the retaining wall back towards the house and meet the ground where that elevation meets.
And what was the height of the wall?
I will defer that question to the applicant,
Okay.
although
Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Thank you. Mo Blocks from Southern Landscaping and Construction Incorporated. I can probably answer some of the questions before you ask them, if you would like for me to do it that way.
Go ahead.
Okay. The area with all the river rock in it is way larger than what's going to be left when we do it. The retaining wall we're going to put in, which is replacing the wooden, will only be 10 feet from the bulkhead up. And the reason for wanting to put it in is we're going to hold back the elevation. It's only going to be probably 2 foot showing, a foot in the ground, okay, the wall, all right? The river rock has to be removed because I'm doing the bulkhead. So we have to put tiebacks 10 foot up into it. So all that rock gets removed. We build the wall 10 feet back. It'll have 2 return walls, 6 foot on each end. And the impervious surface will probably be reduced by a third and end up going to being lawn up behind the bulkhead with the plants on the land side of the bulkhead.
Just to make sure I understand, you're only building one wall? Or
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The
But what I'm
existing
saying-
vinyl is remaining?
Oh, no, the shoreline work is a totally different issue. That's all been approved.
Okay.
We're putting in a vinyl bulkhead 2 foot in front of a failed wooden bulkhead. That's on the water side. This is a landward retaining wall.
Got it.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Have you, I assume you considered potential impact on the neighboring properties in terms of lateral flow?
Yes, sir. This will be a more controlled situation because, like I said, this is only set back about 10 feet from the shoreline. You see that other one's probably 20 feet where it's all curved back in there. That's going about a third of that's going to become grass. So we're going to have more absorption.
I think the question was in regard to the sheet flow that comes off of that fill area, not so much the stone, but concerns for water going on adjoining
Okay.
property.
The elevation from the top of the bulkhead back to that wall is already 2 feet, okay? We're putting the wall in right where it was 10 feet back. There will be really no extra fill behind the wall. The elevation is identical to the existing yard. But because the bulkhead is down here and the yard's up here, the bulkhead will stop dirt from moving towards the bulkhead. And all the river rock goes back between the bulkhead and the new wall.
It's a lot of rock to move.
Yes, sir, it's a whole bunch of them.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Oh, one thing I might add, I always put a drain behind the walls, no matter how high they are. There will be a 4-inch drain, which goes to answering some of your question in a controlled situation.
Okay, but any,
I think Mr. Roadley had a question or a concern potentially about the bulkhead replacement project from the wetlands.
I was
just
a
want to
little confused. I
explain.
apologize.
Yeah, I just want to explain to the board what happened in this case. It did come as a wetlands application. It was considered a bulkhead replacement no greater than 2 feet seaward of the existing wall, which meets all requirements for an administrative approval and would not come before the Wetlands Board. Just wanted to make, and that was part of the original application. And that might help clarify some of the confusion between the bulkhead and the retaining wall.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I can understand the desire to utilize this portion of the property in this manner adjacent to the pier and so forth. Unfortunately, it's kind of counter to what we're trying to do with the Chesapeake Bay Act and maintaining vegetated buffers immediately adjacent to the waterway. I also recognize this lot was platted well before the act. So observations.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA TAC 19 TAC 0028 at 117 Godspeed Lane.
Okay, Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. The exception is granted. Thank you for coming out this evening. Next case is CBPA 19-0016, 4107 South Riverside Drive.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here to present case CBPA 19-0016 at 4107 South Riverside Drive. Mr. Jim Duguay of Performance Contracting has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Bernie Sheets for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of decks and fill on property located at 4107 South Riverside Drive within the Chickahominy Haven subdivision and the Yarmouth Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 191090003A. The lot was platted in 1965 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance. Total lot size for this property is 0.89 acres, of which 67% is located within the RPA. The total impervious encroachment associated with the decks is approximately 800 square feet within the landward 50-foot RPA. Additionally, the applicant has proposed bringing in fill to decrease ponding in the depressional areas in the back on the riverside, and then also filling in portions of the front yard as well. The placement of the fill will not require the removal of any existing canopy trees. The applicant is proposing to remove approximately 2,204 square feet of impervious cover derived from the existing driveway and accessory shed structure, of which 1,102 square feet exist within the RPA. Therefore, staff is not requiring any mitigation for the proposed encroachments into the RPA. I'd also like to add that this house had been impacted by one of the hurricanes and was, I believe, and Mr. Sheets could correct me if I'm wrong, it was did obtain a FEMA grant to elevate the house. So the house structure itself is outside of the floodplain. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined that the grading impacts associated with the proposal to be major, but the impervious cover impacts to be minor for the proposed development. Therefore, we recommend approval of the exception request with the following conditions: that the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, that All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. That the exception request approval become null and void if construction is not begun by April 10th, 2020, and that any written request for extension to the exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than February 27th, 2020, 6 weeks prior to that expiration date. If I may direct your attention to the monitors. Their request is to construct 2 decks and fill the property. Property is located at 4107 South Riverside Drive within the Chickahominy Haven subdivision, located right here on the Chickahominy River. Close up version of the aerial photograph. There's an existing drive. This aerial photograph is a little old. This structure no longer exists. This gravel concrete drive down to a boat ramp to the water. Existing shed here. This area in the back is a depressional area. Turned on the contours for you. The house was elevated out of the floodplain. And then in the course of doing all that work, this area is prone to holding water, and a sump pump has been installed that discharges into it's on a float valve and discharges into the Chickahominy River. There are existing bald cypress here along the bulkhead and over here along this bulkhead. Those are being proposed to remain. The RPA, as it affects the property, it goes to basically to the face of the house and does encompass all of this garage and boat ramp access over here to the north. And then the floodplain as it affects the property. From the site plan application, we'll be redoing the front stoop, and we'll see a picture of that here in a moment, and then a proposed deck 11 feet wide by 66 feet long in this area. They are filling in the backyard here. The existing finished floor of the main residence is elevated up to 20.5 feet. The garage elevation here and over here are at 10.5 feet. According to this note there, they're filling here to elevation 7, 6, and then 5. They are putting in a swale adjacent to the existing driveway to capture any stormwater runoff from this property and direct it not onto the neighbor's property, but down into the river. They will be removing this impervious cover here, along with this structure that we saw in the aerial photograph. And then in the front yard, they are filling this front yard in to a more stable slope. They will be putting in a retaining wall here along the driveway to help keep this proposed fill in place. There's the resource protection area as it affects the property. Proposed deck, impervious cover to be removed. The site photographs from the property. They're going to be holding this elevation here and then filling in this area here. This area here does hold water. The deck would be up at this elevation, encompassing those 3 or 4 doors that exist. This concrete would be removed, the retaining wall would be removed, this garage would be removed. The existing sump that I was telling you about is approximately this area here, and like I said, it's on a float valve, so when it gathers enough water, it turns on and discharges that water into the river. These trees are all bald cypress and they would all remain. The edge of the fill is approximately here, going in a manner, something like that in the rear yard. Front yard, this entry stoop gets reworked, comes out to about here and then does a 90-degree turn into and down towards the existing driveway here. And then this front yard gets filled in as well. So staff does recommend approval of this application with the following conditions should the board choose to approve: that any other necessary local, federal, and state permits are required, that development in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the James City County Floodplain Area Regulations, that the exception request become null and void if construction has not begun by April 10, 2020, and that any written request be submitted to our office no later than 6 weeks prior to that expiration date, which is February 27th, 2020. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this application.
Any questions for staff?
Mr. Wilson, quite a lot of fill on the lot. I understand that because of the removal of existing impervious cover, you're not requesting any additional planting. Has the applicant proposed any additional stormwater treatment other than diversion into ditches? I mean, is there any infiltration opportunity beyond the ditch flow?
Mr. Roadley, the short answer to that is the applicant has not proposed any because staff has not requested any. Chickahominy Haven area typically has poorly drained soils, as you know. I don't know if there would be much opportunity to infiltrate a great deal of stormwater, especially in the rear of the yard, going towards the river. The front of the yard, Mr. Sheets will have to put in a new septic system because that's where the septic currently lies. He is aware of that, and so I don't think there's any opportunity to do stormwater infiltration in the front of the yard. I don't know, we haven't spoken to him about any additional planting mitigation because the application itself was a net reduction in impervious cover.
To follow up the previous application, this is significantly more fill. Has an engineer reviewed the flow calculations to make sure that the conveyances are suitable so that it doesn't spill over on the neighbor's property?
No, that has not happened. We could, if it's the board's desire to do so, we could have a staff engineer calculate, make sure those swales are sized correctly to handle the 10-year storm event. As you know, once it starts flooding, all bets are off.
Well, the flooding I'm not so much concerned about, but whether it's a 10-year event or a larger event, which we seem to get with more frequency, that's really where my concern lies.
Correct. As you know, Mr. Roadley, the state stormwater guidance only allows up to a 10-year event on a man-made channel. So, although the board could request higher design calculations should they desire.
Understood. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. you're removing basically the impervious access to the boat ramp and replacing, or it's being replaced with some pervious gravel, lawn?
I will defer that question completely, the full answer to the applicant, but my understanding of it in talking to Mr. Duguay was the access to the boat ramp was not going to be put back. So it would just be topsoil or constructed
If the
fill.
applicant, yes, would clarify the future use of the boat ramp, that would be useful.
Yeah. Any other questions for staff? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address some of the questions raised?
Good afternoon, I'm Bernie Sheets, I'm the owner. Got any questions?
I guess my question is, if the boat ramp would be in use in the future?
The only use would be to put jet skis in the water.
Okay.
That would be the only thing.
So that traffic is unlikely to compromise any pervious surface that you'd be running over? I mean, it's not a continuing use, automobiles.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? This time I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, these properties obviously were platted well before the act, and I recognize that landowners are trying to do their best to protect their property from flooding. So my only observation is just doing it in a manner that helps to minimize deposition in state waters. So if staff is willing to just review the calculations to make sure that the swales are sized appropriately, I think that would be helpful as some measure of insurance.
Just a comment, my wife is involved in the tidal monitoring program, and she's chosen as one of her monitoring sites, Riverside Drive. So every time there's a high tide, I've been down there, and boy, it definitely floods down there. There's a lot of standing water. And I've noticed that some of the ditches, which I remember years ago were grass, have now reverted to wetlands plants. This area was wetlands, and it's parts of it are going back to being wetlands now. So,
Sort of a question for me, just as a matter of information. Do you find individuals proposing something like rain gardens and addition of?
We have. James City County is blessed with a lot of beauty, but also cursed in some respects with poorly drained soils in certain areas. And so, to Mr. Wilson's comment, we can't always accommodate those. And even though he's placing a lot of fill here, as you get closer to where that would be potentially treated, the fill is more of a veneer than fill. So I'm not sure placing engineered fill there would help too much.
any other discussion? Would someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adopt staff recommendation, a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 19-0016 at 4107 South Riverside Drive.
Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries and the exception is granted. Thank you for coming out. Our final case for this evening is CBPA 19-0023, 573 Forest Lake Road.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for having me. This is Trevor Long, here to present CBPA 19-0023, 573 Forest Lake Road. Mr. Kyle Polk of the Structures Group has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of H. Clifton Scott, Susan Carter, and Deborah and Drew Kennedy for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the replacement of a single-family dwelling on property located at 573 Forest Lake Road within the Diaskin Creek watershed. Parcel was platted prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The total lot size of this property is 2.22 acres, of which 99% is located within the RPA. Current site conditions include a single-family dwelling, a shed accessory structure, and a pier. A total of 3,359 square feet of encroachment into the seaward 50-foot RPA is associated with the existing house on property. With the reconstruction of this house, 3,326 square feet of encroachment are anticipated in the RPA, therefore equating to a net decrease in impervious area by 32 square feet. At this time, the applicant has proposed the plantings of 1 canopy tree and 10 shrubs, therefore exceeding county mitigation requirements for this amount of encroachment. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the replacement of a single-family dwelling and finds that the application meets the conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14, and that the application should be heard by the board because the redevelopment of the parcel does not meet ordinance requirements of a net decrease in impervious cover by 10%. Therefore, this request must be considered by the board following a public hearing under the formal exception process. A WQIA was also submitted along with this exception request for the proposed project. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff does recommend approval of this exception request with the following conditions incorporated into its approval: that the applicant obtain all other necessary local, state, and federal permits as required for the project, that a surety of $500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office be provided to ensure the mitigation plantings, that all development activities located in the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3 floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits prior to commencement of such activities, and that this exception request become null and void if construction has not begun by April 10th, 2020, with written requests for extensions submitted no later than 6 weeks, February 27th, 2020, to the expiration date. I'll now divert your attention to your monitors for a brief presentation. Again, this is CBPA 19-0023, 573 Forest Lake Road. And the applicant request is to replace a single-family dwelling here in the Diaskin Creek watershed off of Forest Lake Road. The aerial photo showing the entirety of the parcel, significant amount of wetlands and waterfront, indicating that the topography here fairly flat and not a whole lot of slope going on, but very low elevations. The resource protection area does encompass 99% of the property, with just the furthest tip outside of the RPA. Again, floodplain here is an issue, which I believe is part of the thought with the reconstruction of the house. I believe it is also being raised to accommodate for flooding purposes. Site plan, the existing site plan as can be found on the parcel with the house located here, the 50-foot RPA impacting the house as shown above, and the 100 on the parcel. This is the existing house, and in orange I've highlighted the steps of which the applicant has proposed to remove associated with the renovations to the house. The proposed site plan listed above with the filling here, They're filling this nook, however, in total decreasing the perimeter of the house and changing these steps that are to remain with drip steps to accommodate, be more water quality efficient as opposed to the brick steps that were there before. Proposed mitigation will be planted here, just adjacent to the proposed renovations. Some site photos. Here's the nook that is proposed to be filled. From the nook out towards the water, and here are the current steps that are to be replaced. These same steps exist around the house. And again, staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are required. That a surety of $500 be made acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to ensure mitigation. That all development activities located within the special flood hazard area comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations. And this exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by April 10th, 2020, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than February 27th, 2020 to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
I didn't quite follow. What was the body of water directly in front of the house?
Yes, this is the Diaskin Creek.
Okay.
I realize this is not under the applicant's control, but was the existence of the VEPCO easement, did it have any noticeable impact on vegetation? I know sometimes come through and clear everything within many feet of their access. Was that noticeable at all?
I'm not aware. I'll defer any other notices to the applicant, though.
So they're going to reduce the perimeter of the house?
That is my understanding, minus the fill of the nook that is pictured above.
So the nook is going to be filled in, but they're going to pull the rest of the house?
Correct, equating to a total of a 32 square foot reduction in impervious.
Other questions? At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Good evening. My name is Kyle Polk with the Structures Group. Can I answer any of your questions?
Let's see. What was the question about the VEPCO easement?
I'm just curious if, how long have you had the property?
It's not my property. I'm with the design team.
Okay.
I was helping out with the structural portions of it with the architect.
I'm just wondering if the VEPCO easement has any substantial impact on vegetation along the edges.
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of if there's any impact.
All right.
Any questions for the applicant?
I do, just because I'm not an engineer, so you're filling in between in the nook, but then you're reducing the perimeter of the house. I just don't understand how that would work.
With what I understand, it's going to be the same footprint as far as the footing goes, and then the roof eaves are going to be identical, is what I'm under the impression of. So the infill of that I wasn't aware of. I don't know that it shows that on the plans necessarily. Can we go back to that? Yeah. I didn't think that was the roof line itself. I believe the roof line was coming around that alcove again. That was my understanding.
So your understanding is that the existing footprint is what would...
And the identical roof line was going to be the same as well.
There would be an increase in impervious area.
No, the footprint would be the same. We're just getting rid of steps, is my understanding.
But that carve-out in the existing dwelling appears to have been covered with roof in this picture. I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, I'm looking at the highlighted area as well. That was not the impression I was given.
Really, we're just trying to verify if the numbers are, is it a 32-foot reduction or a increase?
Looks like it's filled in.
May I, Mr. Chair, chime in? Mr. Long and myself met with Mike Matthews, the owner of the Structures Group, on site. He had indicated at that point in time that the interior of the U, if from the existing, would be filled in as house, like Mr. Roadley suggested. When we got this drawing here showing the new house, we did notice that it says here that the existing drip line of the roof was in this area, and then this was the proposed being the area that Mr. Long highlighted in yellow. So between the addition of the house structure in the interior minus the roof line of the exterior equated to a negative 32-foot reduction. I understand the confusion. It took us several half hours to hours to look at it to figure out what was exactly going on. And I do believe somebody had asked a question earlier about whether the structure itself was being raised, and the answer is yes. The finished floor will be 2 feet above floodplain elevation, which puts it at approximately elevation 9, which is one of the reasons to do the project from the owner's perspective. So it's similar to the last case in that the house will be demolished, rebuilt on the same footprint, and then elevated up out of the floodplain.
Okay on the footprint? Okay, any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Looks pretty close. They're basically just raising.
I have no comment. I appreciate their attempt to reduce the footprint.
Would someone like to make a motion?
I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA TAC 19 TAC 0023 at 573 Forest Lake Road.
Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. The exception is granted. Thank you for coming out. No, I think we're going to we're seeing a trend, and we're going to see a lot more of. I mean, we went for a long time, and we didn't see many houses being raised. And tonight we dealt with 2 properties that were raised. And I think that's going to be the future of a lot of our cases with the new storm, maps, flood maps, and
Till the point it becomes more costly than it is effective.
it's going to be interesting. But I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of these cases of people raising their houses, and it's a major job. I don't believe we have any board considerations. We don't have any matters of special privilege. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.